I woke up to a dry, insistent knock, like someone was pounding on the door with a closed fist. I looked at the clock. 5:06 a.m. It was still dark, though the sky was just starting to lighten behind the hills. The wind whistled through the cracks in the windows. It brought a chill that slipped under the sheets. I got up slowly. I put on the wool sweater hanging on the chair and walked down the hall. The cold tile floor creaked under my steps. In the kitchen, the floral curtain moved with the draft from the half-open window. The knocks returned, louder this time, more urgent. I opened the door. Linda Davis was standing there. Her face was pale, her hair a mess, and her coat was on inside out. Her hands were shaking. "Sir," she said, her voice breaking, "don't go to the office today. Please." Her eyes looked like she hadn't slept all night. I tried to calm her down, but she could barely get the words out. "What's wrong, Linda?" I asked. She swallowed hard, looked out at the empty street, and murmured, "Something isn't right at the office." She told me that last night, on her way back from the market, she saw a black car parked in front of the Morris Architecture building. The engine was still running, but no one got out. The driver was wearing a cap. She couldn't see his face. It was there until almost midnight, she said. While she was cleaning the office hallways, she heard the voice of Richard, my son, talking on the phone. She heard him say, "Tomorrow will be a new beginning." I frowned. That phrase sounded like an announcement, a plan. I tried to call him immediately. The line was busy. I tried 3 more times. The same result. Linda stopped me before I could try again. "Listen to me, sir. Last night I heard noises in the company garage. It wasn't any of the staff. I saw shadows. There was someone else there, maybe a security guard." I tried to reassure her. "No, sir," she said firmly. "It wasn't a guard." Her voice trembled as if saying it out loud was dangerous. I invited her in, but she refused. She looked from side to side, afraid someone was watching her, and hurried away. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her figure disappear into the early morning fog. I went inside, made coffee, and turned on the local radio. The host was talking about a power outage that happened during the night in the downtown office district. Electrical failures due to maintenance, he said, but something in his tone sounded unconvincing. I sat at the table, stirring the coffee without drinking it. A bad feeling settled in my chest, like a physical weight. I decided not to go to the office. Something told me I shouldn't leave the house that day. I went out onto the porch. The air smelled like damp earth and freshly cut grass. The mist still covered the rooftops of Springfield. A sparrow landed on the rusty railing, pecking at the dewdrops. In the distance, the baker's truck honked its horn. Everything seemed normal, but inside me there was a strange, expectant silence. Around 8, a delivery truck stopped in front of my house. The driver, a young man with a blue cap, shouted, "Mr. Richard Morris, he doesn't live here," I answered. He looked at the address, frowned, and drove off. At 9, the landline rang. It was an unknown number, I answered. Silence on the other end. Just breathing. Then a click, and the line went dead. At 10, my neighbor, Mr. Lewis, the neighborhood blacksmith, knocked on the door. His face was smudged with soot. "Haven't you heard the news?" he asked. "What news?" "Your building. They say it's full of smoke. The fire department is on its way there now." I felt something inside me break. I ran to the television, turned on the local channel. The screen showed a building in flames. I immediately recognized the facade of my company. The reporter was talking over the sound of sirens. "At this time, we cannot confirm the identity of one person who may be trapped inside." I grabbed the phone. I called Richard. This time, the line wasn't busy. The number was disconnected. I put on my coat and left. I was determined to go there, but a police car was blocking the street. The officer held up his hand and shouted, "Area cordoned off, sir. No one can pass." I stood on the sidewalk, watching the smoke rise behind the rooftops. I went back home. I called Linda. She answered, crying. "Sir, they're saying that you died in the fire." "Who's saying that?" I asked, not understanding. "Richard himself, sir. He confirmed the news to the reporters." The silence chilled my blood. "Are you sure?" "I saw him on TV," she sobbed. "He said you were inside, that you couldn't make it out." I turned on the television again. There he was, Richard, standing in front of the still smoldering building. His shirt sleeves rolled up, his face dirty, his eyes wet. He said between sobs, "My father was inside. He tried to save some blueprints. He didn't make it out. Someone hugged him. The cameras captured every gesture. The news ticker ran across the bottom. Tragedy at Morris Architecture. Stephen Morris dies." I felt dizzy. I sat down. My hands were shaking. The entire city thought I was dead. My own son had confirmed my death. At noon, the Springfield Gazette published an extra edition. The legacy of Stephen Morris continues in the hands of his son, Richard. My black and white photo, with a black mourning border. I spent the rest of the day in silence, walking through the house as if it belonged to someone else. At 5, someone knocked on the door again. A tall man in a dark suit, holding a briefcase, introduced himself. "I'm from the insurance company. I'm looking for Mrs. Morris, the widow." I answered in a flat voice. "No widow lives here. I'm the gardener." The man looked me up and down, suspicious. His eyes scanned the hallway behind me, as if measuring every corner. Then he smiled with forced politeness. "Sorry to bother you. Good afternoon." I watched him leave, but before getting into his car, he looked back at my window one more time. I locked the door, pulled down all the blinds, and turned off the lights. Night fell quickly. I sat in the dark, listening to the ticking of the wall clock and the distant barking of dogs. Through the curtain I saw the silhouette of a man walking on the sidewalk. It was him, Richard. He crossed in front of my house. He stopped for a few seconds in front of the gate. He looked inside. Then he kept walking, slowly, without looking back. I froze. He knew. He knew I was still alive, and he wanted the rest of the world to believe otherwise. I got up, lit a candle, took my old notebook, and wrote a few lines. "If I disappear for real tomorrow, look for Father Michael. He will know the truth." I blew out the candle. Outside, the mist covered the streets of Springfield, and the wind, heavy with ash, smelled of burnt wood and betrayal. 3 days after the fire, St. Michael's Church was draped in black. The bells tolled slowly, with that deep sound reserved for when someone from the town dies. In the atrium, flower vendors lined up in silence. A mourning ribbon with my name fluttered on the facade. Stephen Morris. I left the house before dawn, covered in a dark coat and a hat that hid half my face. The air smelled like melted pavement and freshly baked sweet bread. The streets were damp from the previous night's drizzle. I walked slowly, blending in with the people heading to the funeral. No one suspected a thing. I was just another stranger among the mourners coming to say goodbye to myself. Inside the church, the murmuring was low, almost irreverent. The casket, covered in white flowers, sat in the center. On top of it, a framed photograph of me, between 2 tall, sputtering candles. I stood still at the back, watching. I felt a chill seeing my own smiling face from that old picture, the one from the company anniversary, more than 10 years ago. Richard was standing at the altar, dressed in impeccable black, the knot of his tie perfectly straight. His eyes were red, but I couldn't tell if it was from crying or exhaustion. He gripped the microphone with both hands. "My father taught me to build with the heart," he said, his voice trembling. "Today his legacy continues with me." A murmur of approval rippled through the church. Some women cried. Other men, old colleagues of mine, nodded emotionally. I, on the other hand, felt a knot of rage rise in my throat. It was a rehearsed speech, a scene planned down to the smallest gesture. As he spoke, Richard looked at the audience with that solemn air he used to use to convince investors. He paused, sighed deeply, and pretended to wipe away a tear. "My father believed in the truth," he added. "Therefore, in his memory, we will donate the main building to a foundation that will help young architects." The crowd burst into applause. I clenched my fists inside my coat pockets. This wasn't a tribute. It was the first step of his new business, selling my company under the mask of charity. In the crowd, I saw Linda sitting in the back row, her face covered with a handkerchief. Her shoulders were shaking. She was looking everywhere, as if searching for a sign that I was there. When our eyes met, just for a second, she held her breath. I moved my head slightly, signaling her to be quiet. I saw her look down, clutching the handkerchief in her hands. I also noticed Father Michael, the old parish priest, coming out from the sacristy. He walked toward the altar with slow steps. As he passed by me, he recognized me. His expression changed completely. from his usual serenity to pure astonishment. He barely raised an eyebrow, as if asking if what he was seeing was real. I shook my head slowly. He understood. He kept walking. He stopped next to the casket and began to read the prayers. "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away," he said. "May the truth accompany those who remain." His words seemed to have a double meaning. Richard looked up for a moment, surprised. Silence filled the church. I left before the Mass ended. I couldn't stand to hear any more lies from my own son's mouth. In the atrium, the fresh air hit my face. The bells were still tolling slowly, as if mocking me. Across the street, a group of journalists surrounded Richard. Cameras were rolling. Microphones pointed at him as if he were a star. "My father always believed in the truth," he declared with a firm voice. "That's why today we are donating the building to a charitable foundation." Every word he spoke landed like a brick on my chest. Lie after lie, spoken with the calmness of someone who knows no one will contradict him. While he was talking, a man I knew all too well approached to shake his hand. Figueroa, my old lawyer, the same one who, years ago, promised to protect my rights and my family's. Now I saw him smiling next to Richard, patting each other on the back, complicit in something much bigger than a simple inheritance. I followed them from a distance, my head down. They got into a gray car, but Figueroa got out a few blocks later and went into a cafe near the downtown square. I sat at an outdoor table, pretending to read the newspaper. From there I could hear fragments of their conversation. "The insurance papers are ready," said Figueroa, a thin man with glasses. "No one will suspect a thing." "And the notary?" asked the other man. "Paid off. Everything looks legal." I discreetly took out my notebook and wrote down the car's license plate number. The waiter glanced at me. I left him a generous tip to distract him. I waited for Figueroa to leave. I saw him wave a quick goodbye, get in the car, and drive north. I walked back through the empty streets, my soul filled with ash. Springfield, my city, no longer recognized me. The neighbors talked about my death as if it were a distant anecdote, a rumor to discuss over lunch. I passed among them, invisible, just another ghost on the streets where I had worked half my life. That night Father Michael knocked on my door. He was wearing an old coat, his hands covered in dust, and a leather bag he seemed to have protected for years. "I knew you weren't dead," he whispered as he entered. "May God forgive me, but I kept your documents." He put the bag on the table and opened it carefully. Inside was a large envelope, sealed with red wax. I opened it. It was my original will, signed 10 years ago. Father Michael lowered his voice. Richard presented another one, a new one. Same date, same signature. "But the handwriting isn't yours." I took a magnifying glass from my desk and looked at the lines. The forgery was perfect, but the stroke didn't have my pulse. The curves were softer, younger. A cold sweat ran down my back. "Who certified this?" I asked. "Figueroa," the priest answered, "and the municipal notary. They were both paid for their silence." I put the real document inside a leather folder. Father Michael told me the Silver Creek property had already been sold. Registered in Richard's name, as part of his foundation, it was the land where my father's workshop stood, where I had learned to work with wood as a child. "He's erasing everything," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "every trace of who we were." Father Michael put a hand on my shoulder. "God sees more than what men hide. But you must be careful, Stephen. He already thinks you know. I promised to stay hidden. I asked him to keep the original will in the church archive." Before he left, he looked at me intently. "When the time comes, the truth will have to come to light." I nodded. I didn't answer. I went out for a walk. The downtown streets were almost empty, except for the stalls cleaning up the leftover funeral flowers. On the main corner, I saw a new poster plastered on the wall of City Hall. Morris Foundation, Building the Future. The image showed Richard smiling next to me, but my face was out of focus, as if time had erased me. I took out my old phone and took a picture. I saved it. One more piece of evidence. The wind blew a piece of paper that rolled to my feet. I picked it up. It was a flyer for my company's memorial event. On the back, someone had handwritten, "Not all the dead are at rest." I quickened my pace back home. When I arrived, I noticed something different. The door was slightly ajar. I entered slowly, silently. Everything was in order, except for one thing. On the dining room table, my pocket watch gleamed, the one I had lost a month ago. Next to it, a note written in blue ink. "Don't play with fire, Father." I felt the air leave my lungs. I closed all the curtains, turned off the lights. I sat in the dark for a while, listening to the sounds of the house. The ticking of the clock, the creaking of the wood. I knew they had been there, that they had searched everything, that they were watching me. I went to the back room. I lifted the rug, opened the floor hatch, and pulled out the old metal box where I kept my most important documents. Inside was the hard drive with the company's accounting records, the invoices, the projects, everything. I wrapped it in a coat and wrote on a piece of paper, "If anyone finds this, give it to Megan Morris." Megan, my youngest daughter, the only one who had inherited some of my character and none of her brother's ambition. I hid the package in the wardrobe and covered it with blankets. I lit a candle. The flickering glow lit up the walls, the family portraits hanging over the piano. In one of them, a young Richard was hugging me, smiling, showing his teeth. I couldn't help but remember the first time I took him to a construction site, when he was 10. I taught him to measure, to trust the level, to not lie with his hands. Now all of that was far away, distorted, like the image of my face on the foundation's posters. The clock struck midnight. Outside, the dogs were barking. I grabbed a small suitcase. I packed some clothes, the envelope with the will, and the backup hard drive. I blew out the candle. Before leaving, I stopped for a moment in front of the entryway mirror. I saw a tired man with sunken eyes, but alive, more alive than all the people who were burying me. I wrote one last line in my notebook. "This is not my death. It is the beginning of my return." I left the house before dawn without looking back. The church bells were still ringing, as if still praying for my soul. But I knew I wasn't the dead one. It was everything I had ever believed in about my own son. I left Springfield while the sky was still a blue shadow. The streets were empty, damp, covered in fog, as if the whole town were still asleep. I walked on the cobblestones leading to the outskirts, the sound of my footsteps breaking the silence. The early morning air smelled like fresh ground coffee. It was coming from the Overlook, the old diner where I used to have breakfast with Richard on Saturdays. Back when we still talked about projects and not money. Now, every memory had a sharp edge. I adjusted my scarf and kept walking. I carried a cloth bag over my shoulder. Inside was some money, the original will, and the hard drive with the financial files. Nothing else. The essentials for a man who no longer existed. I reached Zacatero Street, a narrow road with peeling facades and rusty iron balconies. There, I found a small inn called the Orange Grove Inn. The wooden sign hung crooked. I rang the bell. A woman in her 70s, with her hair in a bun and small eyes behind thick glasses, opened the door. "Looking for a room, sir?" she asked, without much curiosity. "Yes, for a few days." "Nobody asks questions here," she said, lowering her voice. "Come in. I'm Mrs. Clara." The room was simple. An iron bed that squeaked at the slightest movement, a small table with a lamp that had a broken base, and a window overlooking the inner courtyard, where damp clothes hung and an old radio played a scratchy ballad. I sat at the table, took out my notebook, and wrote, "Day 4 since I was declared dead." The pen trembled in my fingers. Outside, the murmur of the street mixed with the distant crowing of a rooster. I was trying to convince myself I had a plan, but the only thing I had was fear. At noon, I saw 2 men in the courtyard from my window. They were smoking, leaning against the wall. One of them was looking up at the second-floor rooms. They didn't look like guests. I leaned a little closer and recognized him. Mario, my old driver. He had been fired last year, after 20 years with me. Richard accused him of not being loyal. Our eyes met. He blinked quickly, nervously. He didn't make a gesture. That night, around 11, there were 3 soft knocks on my door. "Sir." "It's Mario." I opened it. His face was pale, his hands stained with grease. "They're looking for you," he whispered as soon as he entered. "They say you had documents. Something with your signature." "Who are they?" "Men from Chicago. Richard brought them. They pay well. They want to make sure there's no trace of the old contract." He was quiet for a moment, staring at the floor. "I still have the keys to the old warehouse. Where we kept the old blueprints, he added cautiously. No one has changed the lock on the side gate. We'll meet tomorrow night, I told him. I need to check something. Mario nodded and left with short steps, without looking back. I slept badly that night. I dreamed of the building fire, of Richard's voice saying new beginning, repeating like an echo. The next morning, while I was drinking instant coffee, Linda appeared at the inn's door. She was wearing a beige coat and a scarf on her head. She looked everywhere, as if afraid of being followed. I had to see you, sir, she said, closing the door behind her. I found this. She took out an envelope wrapped in cloth. I placed it on the table and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, written by me, dated 2015, my own handwriting. It took me a moment to remember it. It was a letter for Megan, my youngest daughter. I had never sent it. I had written it the day I decided to leave the company in my children's hands. In the letter, I told her, if anything happens to the company, find Father Michael. He knows the truth about the family shares. Behind the paper was an addendum, a copy of a cooperation agreement with a foreign fund, signed by Richard, with my name forged. The stroke was identical to the signature on the fake will. I felt a punch in my gut. Where did you find it? I asked. In the cabinet in your office, under a folder of blueprints. The letter was almost stuck to the wood, as if someone had hidden it on purpose. I fell silent. I remembered that afternoon in 2015, the headache, the dizziness, Richard's insistence that I sign some urgent papers. I hadn't read them. He had been planning this since then. Linda continued, these past few days someone has been asking about your daughter. A young man with a northern accent. He said he wanted to confirm an inheritance. What name did he give? I don't know, but he was carrying a folder with the foundation's logo. I asked her to leave Springfield that very night, to take refuge at her niece's house. She shook her head, with a mix of fear and pride. I have family here. I won't let them destroy your name, sir. I was moved by her loyalty. I gave her an envelope with some money, in case she changed her mind. Before she left, she stopped at the door. Be careful. He doesn't forgive those who know too much. In the afternoon, I went to the parish. Father Michael opened the door immediately. His eyes darted around nervously. They've started moving money to Panama, he whispered, locking the door. He spread a paper on the table, a bank statement. The header said Morris Foundation, with transfers to a foreign account. Richard sold the Silver Creek land. He's presenting it as rebuilding the legacy. I bit my lip until I tasted the metallic tang of blood. I gave him the original will. Keep this here, Father. If anything happens to me, only show it when you're sure. He nodded. Your son's sin is great, Stephen. But he is not the only one. There are other names on that list. I left the church with a heavy heart. The afternoon light stained the walls orange. I had the feeling that everything was closing in on me. When night fell, I met Mario on the corner of the abandoned workshop. He carried a small flashlight and a bunch of keys. The building looked like a dark skeleton against the sky. We pushed the gate. The sound of rusted metal echoed down the alley. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of burnt paper. Mario turned on the flashlight. Careful, sir, he whispered. They've been here. On a metal table was a gray box inscribed, Old Archives, Destroy. I opened the lid. Inside were ashes, charred pieces of paper. I recognized bits of my blueprints. Structural lines, signatures, numbers, 30 years reduced to dust. He wants to erase your history, sir, Mario said, his voice breaking. Not mine, I answered. Everyone's. We continued checking the shelves. In a side drawer, I found a small silver USB drive with a label, New Century Plan. We plugged it into Mario's old laptop. A list of contracts and transfers signed by Richard appeared on the screen, with names of foreign companies, some registered in the Cayman Islands. Here it is, I murmured. The complete plan. I took pictures of everything with my phone and copied the files to the hard drive. Suddenly, we heard a noise, a sharp knock on the main door. The lights of a car filtered through the cracks. Check the drawers. The old man can't be far, a voice yelled. We turned off the flashlight. My heart was pounding in my chest. We hid behind a shelving unit. 2 men entered. They checked the boxes. One of them kicked a table. The boss says he had something stored here. The voice sounded tense. If we find it, he pays us double. We waited until they left. The silence returned, thick as the dust falling from the ceiling. Mario was breathing hard. They're hunting us. Then you're leaving town tomorrow, I told him. Don't come back until this is over. He nodded, tears in his eyes. Thank you, sir. No one believed you were still alive. We left through the side door. The cold night air hit our faces. I walked back to the inn alone. I passed an all-night shop and bought a candle and a lighter. I already knew what I had to do. Back in the room, I lit the candle on the table. The flame trembled, casting my shadow on the wall. I took out the letter for Megan and the copy of the contract. I wrapped them in a plastic bag and hid them inside my coat. Tomorrow, at dawn, I would bury them in the church's backyard where no one would look for them. I sat on the bed and listened to the church bells ring every hour. 1, 2, 3 times. Each toll reminded me that time was running out. That silence was no longer protection, but a condemnation. That night, before dawn, I wrote a single sentence in my notebook. As long as the fire keeps burning in his hands, I can never be who I was. Then I blew out the candle and waited for the first crow of the roosters, knowing that the next day would be darker than the night. I left the inn before the clock struck 7. The morning air was freezing, but the sky was starting to lighten over the rooftops of Springfield. I walked with my hands in my pockets to the Sweet Haven Cafe, right across from the main square. From there I could see City Hall, the balconies adorned with flags, and the coming and going of people who had no idea that the man they thought was dead was sitting among them. I ordered a black coffee and sat in the furthest corner, where the light barely touched the table. I opened the day's paper, and there he was, Richard's image, taking up the entire front page. The headline read, "Richard Morris spearheads revitalization of historic downtown." In the photograph, he was smiling as he shook the mayor's hand. Next to him, cropped and slightly blurry, was my figure. My face faded, my eyes barely visible. They had taken an old photo from a ceremony years ago and manipulated it to make me look present, pleased, blessing his actions. I read the article, my pulse quickening. They described him as the exemplary son continuing his father's legacy, the architect who turned grief into hope. They even mentioned that Stephen Morris would be proud to see his work reborn. I didn't know whether to laugh or tear the newspaper into 1,000 pieces. A voice interrupted my thoughts. "Can I get you some sugar, sir?" I looked up. It was Alan, one of my old assistants at the firm. His hair was shorter, but I recognized him immediately. His eyes widened in shock. "Sir," he whispered, "I thought you were dead." I signaled for him to be quiet. He leaned in, pretending to wipe the table, and spoke in a low voice. "Richard fired all the old-timers. He fired me 2 weeks ago, says he wants new blood. But that's not all. He's selling your designs. Yours, sir, to American investors. Without your name, not a single mention." I felt a heat rise in my chest, a mix of rage and shame. "Are you sure?" "Completely. I saw the models with my own eyes. They changed the logo, presented as part of the new Morris Foundation project." I left him a generous tip and a handshake. "Don't tell anyone you saw me, not a word." He nodded, scared, and walked away. I left the cafe. The air felt heavier, as if Springfield itself had changed its breathing. In the square, a group of cameras and journalists was clustered in front of City Hall, among them, Richard. He was wearing a light gray suit and a politician's smile. He spoke with a firm voice. "My father would be proud of what we're doing. This city was his dream, and I just want to fulfill it." A few feet away, the mayor applauded him. The flashes went off again and again. I moved slowly along the edge of the square without looking up, and then I felt it, his gaze. I turned just slightly and saw him, watching me. His eyes met mine. No surprise, no fear, just recognition. It was a calm, calculated look. A silent confirmation. "I know you're still alive." I didn't stop. I crossed the street and disappeared among the market stalls. I knew the game had changed. It wasn't just about hiding anymore. Now he knew I was watching him. At noon I went to see Father Michael. He had just finished Mass and the smell of incense still hung in the air. He took me to his office, closing the door behind him. "They came asking for you," he said, frowning. They claimed to be representatives from the Morris Fund. What did you tell them? Nothing. I pretended not to know what they were talking about. But they left this. He handed me a white card with gold lettering. RM Group, Development and Progress. The logo was new, but the R and M were intertwined, just like my company's emblem. I put it in my pocket. This is the proof, I murmured. He's using my name to build another empire. In the afternoon, I received a message from Linda. She asked me to meet at the St. John's Market, where the bustle of shoppers masks any conversation. I found her in a side aisle, wearing a black coat and a wide-brimmed hat. Her eyes were tired, filled with fear. I shouldn't have come, she said, but I couldn't keep this. She took a brown-covered notebook from her bag. The name R. Morris was engraved in the corner. I found it at his house, in the study. It was in the desk drawer. I opened the notebook. Every page was a piece of the puzzle. Dates, numbers, accounts, notes. And in the middle of a list of transfers, I read one underlined phrase, "Ensure silence," from Michael and Linda. I looked up. Did anyone see you take it? I think so. For 2 nights in a row, a dark car parked in front of my house. It didn't move until dawn. You have to leave, Linda. Today. Send your son to your sisters in Boston. She shook her head, holding back tears. I have family here, too. I can't run. If something happens to me, let it be known. She handed me a small silver medallion. I kept this when I thought you had died. You gave it to me for Christmas. I took it, unable to say anything. We said goodbye in silence. When I left the market, I sensed a presence behind me. A middle-aged man in a brown leather jacket was following me from a distance. He had a camera in his hand. I quickened my pace. I crossed the street and turned down a narrow alley. I heard his footsteps getting closer. I slipped through a group of kids playing soccer, and using the confusion, I ducked into the side alley of the church. There, breathing hard, I hid the notebook behind a loose board on the St. Joseph altarpiece. I stood still for a minute. My heart was pounding. The air inside the church smelled of wood and wax. If someone must find it, I murmured, let it be Father Michael. As night fell, I decided to go to the carpenter's bar, where Richard used to meet his contacts. It was a place with low ceilings, smelling of wine and old wood. I sat in the back, pretending to be a tired traveler. Shortly before 9, the door opened. Richard came in. He was wearing an elegant dark suit, accompanied by Figueroa and a foreign man, silver hair, and an American accent. They ordered wine. They spoke in low voices, but the echo from the old walls betrayed their words. I took out my phone, turned it on without the screen light, and set it to record inside my coat pocket. I heard scattered fragments. The final transfer will be on Monday. The sealed documents are already at the courthouse. After that, the Morris name will belong to the group. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. My name, my history, my identity, turned into the legal property of my own son. I waited for them to leave. When they went out, I went to the bar and picked up the receipt the bartender had left. It had Figueroa's signature. More proof. I put it in my coat pocket. It was raining outside. The bar lights reflected in the puddles like liquid flames. I started walking back to the inn, but I soon noticed the reflection of headlights behind me. A black car, with no visible plates, was following me closely. I sped up, turned down the convent street, and then through a narrow passage that opened into the backyards. The car stopped. I heard a door open. I ducked into Mrs. Clara's courtyard, hiding among the plants and shadows. Minutes later, 2 men stopped in front of the gate. If we find him, the boss wants proof, not blood, one of them said. Understood, but if he tries to run, then it's not our problem anymore. I waited until the sound of the engine faded. I went up the side stairs to my room. My hands were still shaking. I turned on the old computer and connected my phone. I played the recording. The voices were clear, especially Richard's. In a week, it will all be mine. Even his name. I stopped the playback. I stared at the black screen, listening to my own breathing. I made several copies of the file, one on a USB drive that I hid under the bed, another inside the curtain rod. Then I wrote in my notebook, if anyone looks for me tomorrow, start at the church and the cafe. The truth is in the margins. The rain hammered the tin roof. Every clap of thunder made the windows shake. I stood by the window, watching the town lights reflect on the wet ground. Somewhere, Richard was sleeping peacefully, sure that no one would stop him. I, on the other hand, understood that the manipulation wasn't just a game of money or power. It was something deeper, a net that was slowly strangling me, woven with my own last name. The next thunderclap lit up the room. For an instant I saw my shadow projected on the wall. I no longer recognized the man I saw there. It was just that. Another shadow in the game of a son who knew how to use lies as his finest architecture. Dawn broke, covered in fog. The streets of Springfield seemed suspended in a damp dream, the distant sound of footsteps on the cobblestones and the bells calling to mass. I left the inn with my coat buttoned to my chin and walked slowly toward the square. The flower vendors were preparing their stalls for the town's Christmas festival, hanging paper garlands, colorful banners, and wax candles that were not yet lit. I stopped at a kiosk and bought a copy of the Springfield Gazette. On the front page, like an omnipresent face, was Richard. He was smiling as he shook hands with the director of the provincial bank. The headline, printed in bold letters, read, "Morris Foundation donates $500,000 to Children's Hospital." On the surface, it was a noble act. But deep in the article, almost as a minor detail, was a line that made me grip the paper tightly. Event organized with support from City Hall. He had transformed charity into an instrument of power, and his father's memory into propaganda. The exemplary son building his fortune on the symbolic grave of the man he had betrayed. I tucked the newspaper under my arm and walked aimlessly through the damp streets. Posters with his face hung on the walls with the phrase, "Richard Morris, Rebuilding the Future." It was as if the entire town had become his showcase. As evening fell, I met Father Michael in the church's backyard. We had learned to meet there, far from prying ears. The priest brought a folder protected by a plastic bag. He placed it on the stone table, in the shadows. "This document arrived at City Hall today," he said. "It's a contract submitted by the foundation." He opened it. At the bottom, my forged signature gleamed, dated 2 days after the fire. I ran my fingers over the paper, feeling the texture of the ink. "He doesn't just want my name," I murmured. "He wants my voice." Father Michael nodded, looking down. "And your faith, too." That phrase left a weight in my chest that I couldn't shake. We agreed that, at the right moment, the original will and the documents we had would be revealed. Not before. Every step had to be precise. Richard had eyes and hands in every corner. The next day at noon, Linda arrived disguised in a City Hall cleaning uniform. Her eyes were red with exhaustion. "He fired me," she said as soon as she crossed the threshold. "He says there's a mole in the house." She opened a bag and took out a crumpled piece of paper with hurried handwriting. "Search Linda's room. Possible contact with Michael." I was quiet for a few seconds. Richard wasn't just suspicious. He was already hunting. I told her to leave immediately, to go to the street, Clara Convent, where her cousin still lived. She hesitated, but agreed. Before leaving, she handed me a small memory card. "I got it from his spare phone," she explained. "I didn't have time to copy anything. I plugged it into the laptop and saw dozens of photographs. Screenshots of emails, bank transactions, lists of international transfers. One folder was named RM Legacy Fund. In one of the images, Richard was holding a document up to the camera. I zoomed in. It was an official request. Declaration of presumed death. Stephen Morris. Signed. Sealed. He had legalized my disappearance. I squeezed the card in my fingers until I felt it bend. This was no longer a silent war. It was a slow, methodical execution. The son who played at being pious had completed his act of faith, burying his father alive, with official papers and a mass included. In the afternoon I walked around the main square. The air smelled of sweet bread and dampness. On the facade of the cultural center, a sign announced, "An evening for Papa Morris," a gala in honor of the founder. The gold letters shimmered under the streetlights. Below, the logos of City Hall and the foundation. I read the guest list: the mayor, several businessmen, journalists, diplomats, a perfect function to solidify his role as the virtuous heir. That night, I returned, disguised as a kitchen assistant. Mario, who was now working as a temporary waiter, had gotten me an apron and a cap. I entered through the back door, along with a group of employees carrying trays of wine. No one recognized me. The main hall was lit with an almost theatrical warmth. Golden candelabras, tables dressed in white, string music in the background. In the center, Richard, impeccable in a pearl gray suit, smiling at every journalist. His confidence was absolute, almost arrogant. From a corner, I watched him hug the mayor and pose for the cameras. When he stepped up to the podium, the murmurs ceased. He raised his glass and began his speech. "My father taught me that greatness is not inherited. It is built," he said, looking upward. "And today, all of us are building in his name." The audience burst into applause. Glasses clinked. The lights dimmed. A giant screen lit up at the back. I recognized the background music. It was the same melody we used for the company's presentations. My image appeared. But it wasn't a real video. It was a mix of old recordings, cut together, with my voice synthesized, manipulated by artificial intelligence. I trust my son. He will know what to do. I felt a chill run down my spine. He had even stolen the way I speak. The murmur of the crowd became unanimous. "How beautiful," they said. "What pride." I had to get out before I lost control. I slipped out through the side hallway, avoiding eye contact. As I turned the corner, I almost collided with Figueroa. His face tensed. "You?" he stammered. I didn't answer him. I walked past him, smelling his expensive cologne. Just like before, when he was still my lawyer and swore loyalty. I saw him turn pale. As I turned, he was already on the phone. I hid at the back exit and heard him clearly. "I saw him. I don't know how, but he's here." I went out into the courtyard and took refuge in the kitchen supply storage. The smell of wine and grease made me cough. I turned on my old cell phone and dialed Father Michael. "They've started the show," I told him. On the other end, his voice was firm. "Then it's time to prepare ours." I turned off the phone and waited a few minutes before leaving. The rain was starting to fall, slowly, carrying the sound of music from inside the building. The street lights flickered on the puddles, distorting the faces on the entrance poster. Mine was ripped in half. Richard's was intact. I bent down. I picked up a piece of the poster and put it in my pocket. It wasn't just paper. It was the symbol of the perverse game my son had invented. A theater where he was the devoted son, the honest businessman, the heir who built temples with the ruins of his own father. I walked under the rain until the lights of the hall were out of sight. The water soaked my coat, but I didn't feel cold. I felt rage, the kind of rage that doesn't scream. That cooks slowly, that turns into purpose. When I got to the inn, Mrs. Clara was asleep in her chair. I left my shoes at the door and went up without making a sound. I turned on the lamp. The reflection in the mirror showed an aged face, but alive, stubborn. I took out the piece of the poster and spread it on the table. At the bottom, a phrase printed in small letters, "In honor of the man who taught his son to dream." I smiled bitterly. "And to lie," I murmured. I took my notebook and wrote one more line. Today the game began. But he doesn't know that I know how to play, too. I turned off the light. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the traces of the gala. Somewhere, Richard was toasting his victory. I, in silence, was toasting his fall. That dawn came colder than usual. The air smelled of damp earth, and the wax from the candles the parishioners had left burning in front of the church the night before. I walked slowly, my hat pulled down to my eyebrows, and arrived at the parish house before the bells announced the first service. Father Michael was in the backyard, watering the bougainvillea plants, with a patience only men who keep secrets possess. When he saw me, he set the watering can aside and smiled, though his eyes revealed something more than tiredness. "I knew you'd come early," he said in a low voice. "This is not a day for delays." He led me down the narrow hallway to his office, a room full of dust, books, and the smell of old wood. He locked the door. He opened a cabinet and took out a large envelope sealed with red wax. He placed it on the table carefully, as if it weighed more than a sin. "Here it is," he said, looking me in the eyes. "Your original will, signed and sealed 10 years ago." My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was the document. My clear signature, the notary's seal, and Father Michael's name as a witness. That paper was the only line separating my truth from the perfect lie Richard had woven. "It's authentic, Stephen. I kept it in case you ever needed to defend your name," the priest said. I held it for a few seconds without speaking. It pained me to think that a father needed to hide his legacy from his own son. "We have to get this to Megan," I said finally. "She's the only one who can still act without raising suspicion." Father Michael nodded, stroking his beard. "Father Gabriel is traveling from Chicago tomorrow. He could take her a copy, if you trust him." "I trust him. But if Richard finds out, he'll go after her." "I know," Father Michael whispered. "And not just him. There are other eyes watching." As we spoke, we heard the sound of a car stopping in front of the gate. Two curt male voices argued with someone. Father Michael peeked through the crack and frowned. "They're from the Foundation," he said, barely audible. I hid behind the curtain while he opened the door. Two men in suits with dark glasses handed him an envelope. They spoke for a few minutes, politely, but with a tone that smelled of a threat. When they left, the priest closed the door slowly and leaned against the wall. "They're watching us, even here," he whispered. "They've invited Father Michael to the opening ceremony of the new Morris Center." "Then they're no longer trying to convince you," I replied. "They want to control you." We put the will inside the safe, built into the wall behind the portrait of Street Michael. Father Michael turned the key and put it in the inner pocket of his cassock. "Only I have the copy of this key," he assured me. "If anything happens, you'll know where to look." I left the church as the sun was slowly rising over the rooftops. The town was waking up with its usual calm, but I could no longer see its streets the same way. I knew that every corner could be hiding a shadow sent by Richard. At noon I went to the Street Clara convent, where Linda had taken refuge since her firing. The sisters had taken her in as one of their own. When she saw me, she got up from the bench where she was sitting, dressed in a gray tunic, her face tired. "I thought I'd never see you again," she said, her voice thin. "I've never been closer to danger," I replied. "That's why I'm here." Linda told me that the night before, a tall, dark-haired man had come to the convent asking for her. He claimed to be a representative of the Morris Company. The nuns, suspicious, had made him wait, but he left before they could question him. "He looked at me as if he already knew who I was," she added. "And that scared me." She took a small silver USB drive from her bag. "I found this in Richard's desk, before he threw me out. I didn't have time to see what's on it." I plugged the drive into the convent's old computer. On the screen, folders labeled in English appeared: RM Group, Contracts, Houston Partnership, Springfield Heritage Mall. When I opened one of them, I saw figures in dollars, names of foreign companies and digital blueprints. At the bottom of one document, a line made me clench my teeth. Project: Springfield Heritage Mall. Zone: Silver Creek. I felt a punch in my gut. "That land," I murmured, "was my father's sawmill. For years I had protected it from developers. Richard hadn't just sold it. He was planning to build a shopping mall on the ruins of the place where our family story began." Linda lowered her head. I saw the American with the white hair, the same one who was with him at the gala. "He's back in town." I remembered him. His cold face, his closed contract smile at the carpenter's bar. "Then this is bigger than we thought," I told her. "It's not just greed. This is about erasing me from history." In the afternoon, to blend in, Father Michael and I went to the market to buy bread and fruit. We walked among the stalls, trying to look like two old friends talking about nothing. But the conversations around us were all about Richard. "What a good young man," said one vendor. "He donated $500,000 to the hospital, did you hear?" "A saint," replied another. "His father can rest in peace." Father Michael glanced at me. "How does one live hearing their own canonization?" I smiled bitterly. With the same calm one listens to the Mass at their own funeral. An old woman approached us, pointing to the newspaper she was carrying. "Look, your son is an angel," she told me tenderly. I just bowed my head and murmured, "Angels fall too, ma'am." We returned to the church as the sun began to set. Father Michael checked the old fax machine that still barely worked. Suddenly, the machine whirred. A piece of paper began to slowly emerge. The ink faded. It was a message from Megan. "Dad? A man called the house. Says he's Richard's lawyer. He wants me to sign away my inheritance." I didn't do it. Waiting for news. Father Michael crossed himself. It's clear. Richard already suspects she has part of the truth. We have to protect her, I said. We'll send a copy of the will, but carefully. Have Gabriel deliver it by hand. We checked the contents of the safe. The document was still there, untouched. Still, Father Michael noticed something. Look at the edge of the lock. There was a mark, a barely visible metal indentation. Someone had tried to force it open. I ran my finger over the metal. It was cold, freshly scraped. They are watching us closer than we thought. We placed an additional bar and sealed the door with a wax ribbon. Father Michael wrote the date and signed over it. If they touch it again, we'll know. As I left, the evening wind moved the chimes in the bell tower, making the small iron bells sound like a warning. We crossed the atrium in silence. When I said goodbye, Father Michael told me, "Be careful, Stephen. Faith can also be used as a trap." As I walked back to the inn, I felt someone watching me. I spun around suddenly and saw, in the distance, a figure dressed in black standing at the end of the street. The breeze moved his long coat, but I couldn't see his face. He turned and disappeared into the alleys. I ran a few steps, but only found a crumpled piece of paper soaked with dew. I unfolded it. Too late, old man. My pulse hammered in my temples. When I got to the inn, the main gate was ajar. Mrs. Clara was asleep in the hall, but her lamp was flickering as if someone had passed by recently. I went up to my room. The door was cracked open. Inside, the air smelled of expensive cologne, the kind Richard had worn since he was young. On the table was a white envelope with my full name on it, to Mr. Stephen Morris. I opened it cautiously. Inside, a yellowish photograph. Him and me, hugging, in the first construction workshop we ever had. On the back, in black ink, a handwritten sentence. "You taught me how to build. I learned how to erase." I sat on the bed, the photo in my hands. For a moment, I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. The boy I taught to build walls had learned how to tear them down, starting with me. Outside, the bells struck midnight. The echo mixed with the sound of the wind hitting the blinds. I turned off the lamp, left the photo on the table, and looked out the window. The town slept under a peace that didn't belong to me. I knew the counteroffensive had begun, that Richard didn't just want to destroy my name, but also my silence. And that from that moment on, every piece of evidence, every person who helped me, was in danger. I stayed awake until dawn, listening to the rain on the roof, thinking about how many more things I would have to lose to get my truth back. I woke up suddenly, my heart pounding in my chest. The church bells were ringing with a different urgency, faster, more desperate. I looked out the window. In the distance, toward downtown Springfield, an orange glow lit up the night sky. A column of black smoke rose like an omen. I put on my coat, grabbed a flashlight, and ran into the street. The air smelled of burnt paper, damp wood, and fear. People were running barefoot, shouting, shadows moving between the car lights. "Fire! At the municipal archives!" A boy yelled, pointing toward the hill. I followed the direction of the flames. As I got closer, I recognized the stone building where the official documents were kept, the city's historical archive, the same place where Father Michael had deposited a copy of my original will. Flames poured from the windows like living tongues, devouring the sky. Police and firefighters tried to contain the fire, but it was useless. The entire structure was burning from the inside out. I approached an officer, a young man with an expressionless face. "What happened? What started it?" I asked. Without looking at me, he answered in a monotone voice. "Electrical short, sir. Nothing more." The coldness of his tone chilled me more than the night air. This was not an accident. I backed away, blending into the crowd. Through the smoke, I saw a familiar figure, Richard, standing in front of the cameras. Impeccable white shirt, his face covered in fake concern. He held his phone in one hand and waved to the journalists with the other. "This is a loss for everyone," he declared, looking at the lens. "But we will rebuild." The words hit me with the force of a slap. "We will rebuild." He spoke as if the fire was just another opportunity to shine. I took a step forward, driven by rage, but a hand grabbed my arm. It was Linda, her face smudged with soot, her eyes full of fear. "Don't do it, sir," she whispered. "It's all set up to blame you." I followed her down a side street to an alley where the light from the fire barely reached. "What are you talking about?" I asked. Before the fire started, a neighbor saw the black RM Group truck parked in front of the building. The men unloaded something, and one of them said, "Make sure nothing with his name is left." I leaned against the wall, dizzy. The air smelled of plastic and melted paper. From our hiding spot, we watched the fire reflect off the old stones of the wall. A group of firefighters ran past, dragging a warped metal box. One of them muttered to another. It was the old safe. Nothing left inside. I felt the ground sink beneath my feet. All the original documents, all the proof, reduced to ashes. We stayed silent until the fire began to die down and the crowd dispersed. Linda squeezed my hand hard. Not everything is lost. He thinks fire cleanses everything. But there are some things fire can't touch. By dawn, the news was already in the papers. Accidental fire destroys historical archives. The photograph showed Richard handing out donations to the firefighters. The secondary headline called him a local hero for offering to fund the reconstruction. The town applauded him. I just saw a man erasing his own crime with money and smiles. At noon, I met Father Michael at the Street Clara convent, where Linda had taken refuge again. The priest had deep dark circles under his eyes, and his voice sounded heavier than ever. On the stone table, he placed a small USB drive wrapped in cloth. "This survived," he said. "It's the copy of the bank transfers Richard sent to Switzerland. There is still proof, Stephen. Not everything burns with fire." I ran my fingers over the drive, with a mix of relief and fear. "We have to hide it," I replied. "I've already thought of it. We'll keep it inside the statue of the Virgin Mary, behind the main altar. No one will look there." We spent the afternoon transferring the files to a new drive, while the sound of the nuns' prayers floated in the air. Every digital word copied was a seed of hope, a reminder that I could still get my name back. As we were about to finish, a young novice ran in. "Father! There are 2 men at the door asking for Mrs. Linda. They say they're from the Morris Company." Father Michael looked at me. "Go up to the attic, quickly." I helped Linda up the narrow ladder to the loft. Dust fell in clouds on our heads. From above, we heard the firm footsteps of the visitors. "Good afternoon," Father Michael said, in his usual calm tone. "How can I help you?" "We're looking for a woman. She worked for Mr. Morris," one replied in a dry voice. "I see many women every Sunday," the priest answered. "And also an older man, gray-haired," the other insisted. "They say he's been lurking around here." Father Michael smiled, not losing his composure. "In this town, we are all gray-haired, son." The men looked at each other, frustrated. One of them glanced up at the ceiling, right where we were hiding. For a moment, I held my breath. Then they turned and left. We waited several minutes before coming down. Linda was shaking. "They know," she said in a low voice. "They'll be back soon." "You have to leave tonight," I replied. "I'll send you to Boston. My daughter, Megan, lives there. You'll be safe." Father Michael nodded. "I'll get you the ticket myself. Don't worry." Before she left, Linda took something from her bag, an old black-covered notebook. "I found this hidden behind Richard's desk. I don't think he's noticed it's missing." I opened it. It was his personal journal. The first pages were full of rambling sentences. But on one of them, underlined, I read something that made my heart stop. Andrew asked for his share of the business. I convinced him the old man didn't have it. My younger son, the one who had left for Denver over a decade ago, after a violent argument with Richard. I always thought he had stayed away out of pride, but now I understood. Richard had lied to him. He made him believe that I had disinherited him. "My God," I murmured. He betrayed him too. Linda showed me another page with an address written by hand. Andrew, Liberty Street, Denver. "I'll find him," I said. "But first, get out of here." That night I walked her to the bus station. The city still smelled like smoke. Linda got on the bus with a small backpack. Before she got on, she hugged me tightly. "Don't let them win, sir. Not you." The engine roared. The bus disappeared into the fog. I stood watching until the taillights vanished. It was then that I saw him. Across the street, a man was leaning against a lamp-post. He was wearing a dark coat, a lit cigarette between his fingers. The tobacco smoke mixed with the distant smoke from the fire. He didn't do anything. He just watched the bus pull away. And then, slowly, he turned his face toward me. I didn't need to see him up close to know. He was one of them. I turned and walked quickly back to the inn. When I arrived, the door to my room was ajar. I turned on the light. The air smelled of dampness and ash. The wind moved the curtains. And on the table was something I hadn't left there. A small box of matches, soaked by the rain. The logo on the cover made me shudder. The Sun Diner. I went to the window. In the distance, on the hill, the restaurant's sign was still glowing. The fire from the previous night was already ashes. But the message was clear. I opened the box. Only one dry match was left, broken in half. It was a warning, or a promise. Fire number 2, I thought. The first was for the archives. The next one will be for me. I sat at the table and watched the sleeping city. I knew Richard had started his second phase, to erase not just the documents, but the people who could talk. I wrote in my notebook. The first flame destroyed the past. The second will try to extinguish the truth, but as long as I breathe there will be a spark. I turned off the lamp, took a deep breath, and looked at the horizon. The silhouette of Springfield was still there, serene under the moon. Unaware that in its streets the third fire was being prepared. Dawn arrived, covered in clouds, as if the sky itself refused to see a new day in Springfield. I walked slowly toward the church, my heart heavy, with one fixed idea in my head. If the world already believed I was dead, maybe it was time to use that death. Father Michael was waiting for me in the sacristy, standing by a table covered in papers. When he saw me enter, he held up a document fresh from his old typewriter. The paper still smelled of fresh ink. "Look at this," he said, handing it to me grimly. "Stephen Morris, deceased, June 17th. Signed and sealed by the Civil Registry." I stared at the page for a few seconds. Those words, written in official ink, had the weight of a tombstone. I let out a bitter laugh. "So, I'm officially a dead man. My son is so efficient at burying his own." Father Michael sighed. "If the world believes you are dead, use it to your advantage. Silence can be a mask, but also a shield." I nodded slowly. That idea, so simple and so cruel, was the only way out. If Richard had erased me from the map, then my return would be the crack that shattered his facade. We spent the morning planning. Father Michael proposed creating a network of silent witnesses. Father Gabriel, who was traveling to Chicago, Linda taking refuge in Boston, and Megan, my daughter, who still didn't know the full extent of everything. "Your voice must return," he told me. "Not with shouts, but with words that no one can silence." That afternoon I went to Hidalgo Printers, a small shop that smelled of ink and old wood, where I used to print blueprints decades ago. The owner, Mr. Benitez, looked shocked when he saw me enter wearing a cap and scarf. "I thought you were dead, Mr. Morris," he murmured, lowering his voice. "In a way I am," I replied, "but even the dead have things to say." I asked him to print 20 copies of a handwritten letter, with no return address. As the machine began to roar, I wrote with my good pen, the one Megan gave me the day she graduated. "My daughter, if you are reading this, it means your father is alive, hiding among your brother's lies. Do not believe the documents or the speeches. What died was my name, not my truth." I included a photograph of the USB drive containing the bank records, copies of the forged contracts, and a note with my original signature. I left one envelope for Megan in Chicago, addressed to her full name. The rest, 20 sealed envelopes, I gave to Father Gabriel to distribute among newspapers, notaries, and old colleagues from the company. I wasn't looking for a scandal yet. I was looking for doubt, and doubt, when planted correctly, was the spark that could ignite the truth. That same night, I got on a bus to Denver, following the trail of Andrew, my younger son. The road was long, and the lights of the towns passed by the window like ghosts. In front of me, 2 men were talking loudly. "They say Morris is going to build a shopping mall in Silver Creek." "Yeah, right where the old sawmill was," the other replied. "A hell of a deal." I closed my eyes. Silver Creek, the land where my father taught me to work with my hands, where I raised the first pillar of my company. Now it was going to become the heart of a corrupt project, bearing my last name. I arrived in Denver at dawn. The air smelled of gasoline and fresh bread. I asked for Andrew at the Street John's market. A vendor selling old parts pointed me to a small workshop near the river. Andrew Morris. He fixes engines, good guy. I walked there. A rusty sign hung crookedly. Andrew's Repair Shop. Inside, a man in his 40s, hands covered in grease, was hitting an engine with a hammer. I watched him for a few seconds before saying his name. Andrew. He turned around. His eyes went wide, and the tool fell to the ground. Dad? I didn't say anything. I walked toward him. For an instant, time rewound. I saw him as a child, running in the sawmill, laughing in the dust. We stood motionless. Then, without another word, he came closer and hugged me. I sat with him at the workshop table. I told him everything. The fire. Richard's lies. The fake documents. Megan's letter. He listened without interrupting. Until the end, when he slammed his fist on the table. That bastard. He always wanted everything. He told me you had my share of the money. He made me sign a paper to get it back. And then he disappeared. He searched through his drawers and pulled out a crumpled envelope. Inside, a bill of sale, with my forged signature. The same stroke, the same ink, I already knew. He tricked you too, I murmured, just like everyone else. Andrew took a deep breath. I'm not going to stand by and do nothing. I'm with you to the end, Dad. We stayed in the workshop that night, reviewing the papers. Andrew still had printed emails from Richard and copies of deposits. Among the old tools, I found a phone stored in a drawer. The case was broken, but when I turned it on, I recognized the wallpaper. The RM Group logo. I opened the messages. They were conversations between Richard and Figueroa. The old man is moving. Father Michael knows too much. I felt a chill. I took pictures of the screen and saved them on my own device. Every message was a bullet that, if fired at the right moment, could bring down his empire. At 4 a.m, a sharp knock on the door jolted us. Police, open up. Andrew approached cautiously. Through the glass he saw a man in uniform, but the cut of the suit and the boots didn't match. What do you want? He asked. Inspection. We have a warrant to search the place. He held out a paper. Andrew took it and showed it to me discreetly. The seal was fake. In the bottom corner, in small print, the RM Group logo. Without thinking, we ran to the back of the workshop. We jumped a wall and crossed the alley. The air was cold, the ground slippery from the drizzle. Behind us we heard footsteps and voices. That way! Don't let him escape! We ducked between the market stalls, empty at that hour. The smell of fish and rancid oil mixed with my ragged breathing. We reached the bus stop just as the first bus was starting its engine. We got on without looking back. As the bus pulled away, I saw through the window, a blaze rising on the horizon. Andrew's workshop was burning like a torch. Fire number 3. Andrew gritted his teeth, helpless. Everything I had was in there. I put a hand on his shoulder. He thinks he can erase the truth with fire. But what he doesn't know is that every flame leaves a trail. The bus sped down the highway. The fields passed in a blur under the dawn. I took out my phone and opened the Notes app. I wrote one sentence, slowly, as the words weighed more heavily than ever. If I die for real, let them know it was my own son who lit the fires. I put the phone away and looked out the window. The sun was beginning to peek over the hills, painting the sky orange and gold. The color reminded me of the flames, but also of life. Andrew was sleeping next to me, exhausted. I, on the other hand, couldn't close my eyes. I felt that the fire, the force that had destroyed so much, was now burning inside me with a new purpose. I whispered to myself as the highway carried us back toward Springfield. Now it's my turn to light my own. And for the first time in a long time, the idea of being dead no longer scared me, because I understood that a man only truly dies when his truth disappears, and mine was just beginning to burn. We arrived on the outskirts of Springfield as evening fell. The bus stopped in a golden mist, and the air smelled of damp earth and fresh bread. In the distance, the town looked different. Lights, garlands, and posters filled the streets. It was Christmas Eve. We got off without speaking. Andrew carried a backpack with the documents and equipment. I carried a cane and the weight of my years. As we walked down the road toward the center, the colored lights reflected in the puddles. On every corner hung posters for the Morris Foundation, Hope and Future, all featuring Richard's impeccable smile. I looked at one of them. My name appeared in small letters beneath his. Legacy of Stephen Morris. I read it silently and felt as if I were reading my own obituary. Andrew laughed bitterly. Even in death, you're still working for him, huh? Tonight, I replied. I won't be speaking. I'll let the facts speak. We checked into a small inn near the main arch. The Archway Inn, an old building that smelled of firewood and mulled wine. From the room's window we could see City Hall, adorned with lights and a huge banner that read, Christmas Gala in honor of Stephen Morris. The irony hurt more than any wound. Night was falling when we headed to the church. Father Michael was in the sacristy lighting candles for the Christmas Eve Mass. When he saw me enter, he dropped the match and put his hand to his chest. Good Lord, I thought I'd never see you again. I smiled weakly. Andrew appeared behind me. Father Michael looked at him for a few seconds before opening his arms. God has brought you back together to see justice, he said, emotional. We sat in the small side room where he kept his old books. The light from a yellow lamp barely lit the stone walls. I took out the papers, the photos, the audio, everything we had gathered. Father Michael listened intently, nodding in silence. So, tonight it is, he said at last. In front of everyone. Yes, I replied, it's not enough to survive anymore. It's time to tell the truth, even if it's the last thing I do. Andrew spread the equipment on the table. A wireless microphone, a small projector, and a portable speaker. Everything he could get, with the help of a friend of his in Denver. Father Michael, meanwhile, took a wooden box from a drawer. Inside, the hard drive hidden in the Virgin Mary statue. He connected it to the computer and began copying the files to a USB. I'll keep this in the Bible I'll be using tonight, he said. When the time comes, I'll show it to everyone. The plan was simple, but risky. Father Michael would reveal the existence of the true will. Andrew would project the audio of Richard confessing his fraud, and I would appear, a dead man returning to reclaim his name. At 9 o'clock, the main square of Springfield was an ocean of lights and murmurs. People crowded in front of the stage, where a huge Christmas tree glittered with gold ornaments. The air smelled of punch, wax, and lies. Richard appeared on the main stage, impeccable in his white suit, his face serene, surrounded by photographers and officials. At his side were the mayor, Figueroa, and the silver-haired foreigner I had seen so many times in the shadows. From the church portico I watched, hidden next to Andrew. Richard raised his hands and the audience applauded. His voice, deep and modulated, echoed through the speakers. Tonight, we celebrate the legacy of my father, a man who taught me the value of hard work and faith. The applause was unanimous. Some people were crying. On the giant screen, a video began to play. Images of me from years ago, with solemn music in the background. And then the voice, my voice, manipulated. I trust my son. He will know what to do. The crowd's murmur turned to emotion. I saw women crossing themselves, men raising their glasses. Father Michael gritted his teeth. It's time, he whispered. He got up from the pew and walked toward the stage, dressed in his black cassock. He climbed the steps uninvited and took the microphone. This voice you are hearing does not belong to Stephen Morris, he said firmly. The truth doesn't need holograms either. A tense silence fell over the square. Richard turned to him, forcing a smile. Father, this isn't the time for sermons. Father Michael held up the Bible he was carrying. But it is the time for the truth. He opened the book, took out the USB, and plugged it into the projector. On the screen, documents began to appear. Forged contracts, international transfers, and finally, a letter from me, handwritten. The crowd grew restless. Confused voices began to rise. That's a lie! Richard shouted, moving closer. But at that moment, Andrew emerged from the crowd, turned on his speaker, and played the recording. Richard's voice filled the square. In a week, it will all be mine, even his name. The crowd gasped. That's manipulated, he roared. It's all lies. Then the stage lights flickered, and before anyone could react, I climbed the steps. My footsteps echoed, slow, heavy, but firm. When the spotlight hit me, a murmur spread like a wave. A woman screamed, It's him! He's alive! Richard recoiled, pale. It can't be. You died in the fire. I looked him in the eyes. You started that fire, son. The silence was absolute. Only the wind moved the garlands on the Christmas tree. Flashes began to pop everywhere. People were recording, whispering. Some were crying. Richard tried to approach me, trying to justify his lie. Father, I only wanted to continue what you started. This is all for you. No, Richard, I answered. Slowly, my voice trembling but clear. You did this for yourself, for your ambition. You burned my name to build your own. Behind him, the mayor discreetly stepped aside. Figueroa took a step back and looked down, like a man watching the ship he helped build sink. Even the silver-haired foreigner retreated into the shadows. Father Michael, from the side, took the microphone. Stephen Morris's true legacy is not measured in buildings or bank accounts, but in the truth that has returned to the light today. The words ignited something in the crowd. First, it was scattered applause. Then, shouts of support. Justice! Long live Mr. Morris! Richard, desperate, tried to flee. He ran toward the side stairs, but 2 municipal officers, alerted by Father Michael before the event, intercepted him. He resisted. He shouted. He flailed his arms. I only did what he taught me. I learned from his fire. The handcuffs clicked shut. I watched them lead him through the crowd. Some hurled insults at him. Others looked at him with sadness. I stood still, with no strength left to hate him. Andrew came up and took my arm. It's over, Dad. It's finished. No, son, I said, looking at the sky. This is just the beginning. Now comes the hardest part, living with what's left. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed on the bench in the bell tower, watching the lights that still twinkled in the empty square. Leftover confetti mixed with the fine snow falling on the roofs. The clock struck midnight, and the bells began to ring. Each toll seemed like a requiem for more than just a lost son, for the wasted years, for the innocence that would never return. In the reflection of the glass, I saw my aged face, tired but alive. At last, the dead man could rest, not in the ground, but in the truth. 2 days after Christmas, Springfield woke to a different kind of noise. It was no longer the ringing of bells or the singing of carols. It was the rustle of newspapers and the buzz of local radio. The headlines in large black letters said it all. Richard Morris arrested for fraud and forgery. I stared at that sentence for a long time at the convent breakfast table. My coffee grew cold in my hands. The man who had set my name on fire was now burning in the headlines. The news continued to cascade. Figueroa, cornered, turned himself in to the authorities and confessed to every crime. He handed over the contracts, the bank records, and the plans for the Silver Creek Mall. He even revealed that Richard had opened accounts in Switzerland under false names, using donations from the Morris Foundation. That same morning, Megan returned from Chicago. When I saw her get out of the car in front of the church, I felt the entire weight of the past crumble inside me. She ran to me without a word and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Dad," she whispered through tears, "I thought you were dead." "I was, sweetheart," I said calmly, "but only on paper." Her eyes searched for answers, but in my face there was only exhaustion and a newborn peace. Andrew arrived later, and with him, Father Michael. The 4 of us sat around the old oak table in the convent. The morning sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, painting our hands blue and gold. I took an envelope from my inner coat pocket, the original will. I left it on the table, the seal still intact. "Here is the truth," I said. "I didn't save it to divide you. I saved it so you would learn to remember." Father Michael opened it and began to read aloud. The fair distribution, the will that had been erased, my legitimate signature. When he finished, silence filled the room. Megan was the first to speak. "I don't want anything, Dad." Her voice trembled. "This all brought so much pain. I'd rather my share go to the Street Clara convent, to the place where faith still remains." Andrew nodded, looking at his calloused hands. "I want to rebuild Grandfather's sawmill, not for the money, but to give his name back to the town." I looked at them one by one, with a mix of pride and sadness. "Do what you want," I told them, "but do it with honor." That was always the true legacy. Father Michael smiled. "The fire destroyed the lies, Stephen. But what you have ignited now is justice." In the afternoon, I went for a walk in the square. The air smelled of sweet bread and incense. Children played among the Christmas lights, oblivious to the headlines about corruption and betrayal. As I passed, some neighbors stopped. An old man greeted me with respect. "Forgive us, Mr. Morris." "We believed the lies," I smiled at him. "Lies don't kill, son. Silence does." I kept walking when I noticed that on the City Hall building they had already removed the huge banner with Richard's face. In its place, a white sheet hung over the balconies, with handwritten letters. "The truth does not burn." I stood there for a moment, looking at it, my eyes wet. Those simple words were everything I had been trying to say for months. In the market, I ran into Mrs. Clara, the owner of the inn where I had hidden. "Oh, Mr. Morris," she said, squeezing my hand. "The other night, someone came asking for you." A tall man with a harsh voice. I didn't dare say anything. "You did the right thing," I replied. "They won't be coming any more." I gave her a small envelope with money. "To fix up the room," I said. "The dampness shouldn't stay where there was so much fear." As evening fell, I walked up the path to the Street Clara convent. The sky turned orange, and the air smelled of dried flowers. In the courtyard, Linda was teaching a group of orphan children to write their names on chalkboards. When she saw me, she smiled. "You see, sir," she said, "fire can burn houses, but not the heart of someone who is loyal." I handed her a sealed envelope. "Keep this," I asked her. "It's yours." Inside, a letter in my own handwriting. "Thank you for saving me from the first fire." Linda took it, her eyes shining. "I only did what anyone would do for a just man," she replied. We hugged in silence, knowing our lives were marked by the same fire and the same redemption. That night, I returned to my old house on the hill. The door still creaked when I opened it. Dust covered the furniture, and cobwebs wove new stories in the corners. I turned on the desk lamp. The light revealed the old wooden frame with the photo of Richard as a child, dressed in his first school uniform, smiling, not yet knowing who he would become. I picked up the frame carefully. I looked at it for a long time, and put it in the bottom drawer. I locked it, not out of hatred, but because some wounds must be put to sleep, so they don't reawaken the rage. I went out onto the porch. From there, Springfield spread out below me, full of Christmas lights and bells. Fireworks echoed in the distance, welcoming the new year. The wind carried laughter, and the smell of burnt wood no longer hurt. It just reminded. A child ran past my gate, waving a lit sparkler. "Happy New Year, Mr. Morris," he shouted cheerfully. I smiled and replied, "Happy New Truth, son." The dawn came slowly, covering the rooftops with a thin layer of dew. I sat on the wooden bench in front of the house, the same one where my dog used to sleep when he was still alive. The first light of day filtered through the clouds, warming my tired hands. The sparrows landed on the railing, chirping as if the world was beginning again. I looked at the horizon and murmured, "I don't need fire anymore. I have peace." I closed my eyes. The fresh morning air filled my lungs. From the square, the sound of the bells once again filled the valley. In the distance, at the church, Megan was reading one of my letters aloud to a small group of faithful. "Dad, not all the dead are underground. Some walk until the truth lets them rest." I smiled. There was no better epitaph, because finally, after so much fire, Springfield dawned clean, and I, a man who had been declared dead, was breathing the purest life, the life of silent forgiveness, the life of a truth that at last did not hurt. The sun finished rising. The light bathed the hills, the rooftops, the bells, and for the first time in a long time I felt no fear, only gratitude. The story of the fire was over, and in its place the dawn was just beginning.